Hi, everyone, and welcome to Studio Jake. I, of course, am your host, Jacob Airy. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope that you are going to have a fantastic time with your friends and family today. Yes, I'm wearing the same shirt. That's because I love Texas. No, I'm just kidding. I just forgot to change. But anyway, I'm very excited today because I have on Carrie Sheffield. She is a senior policy analyst for the Independent Women's Voice. She's a public speaker, and she is now an author. She's coming out with a new book called The Motorhome Prophecies. And fun fact, she's actually one of the first people to interview me when I first became an author. So I'm very excited to have her on. All things come full circle, as I like to say. So, Carrie, welcome to Studio Jake.
Thanks, and I love your Return of the Jedi poster. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's really hard to find old school stuff. Like I'm trying to find a Star Trek one for back there, but that's been a little bit more of a battle than I thought. But I'm very excited to have you on. You're doing some great things. You're coming out with this new book, which I will put up an image for everyone. The Motorhome Prophecies. When does this come out?
Launch is March 12th. So it is available for pre-order if folks want to get it. It's coming out in print and Kindle. And I just recorded last weekend. I finished the audiobook.
Wow, that's fantastic. And also, I'll put a link where people can get it in the pinned comment. And everyone, Carrie has an amazing story that she tells in this book. And I wanted to give her a chance to talk about it because as I say, it is tragedy to redemption, and that's something that we all need to hear about with all the craziness going on in the world. I definitely wanted Carrie to be able to share a little bit of her story about what's in the book. So, Carrie, for those of you who might not be familiar with the Motorhome Prophecies, can you tell us a little bit about it and what it entails?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jacob. And yeah, so the title is called Motorhome Prophecies because I grew up in a large extent on and off over the years in a motorhome. And I have 7 biological siblings. So it was 10 people with my parents in the motorhome, which is a feat of physics in and of itself. 10 people in motorhome, which I get into how we did that. But we also lived in other places too. Sometimes we had houses. Sometimes we lived in sheds. And my mother gave birth when the family didn't even have the motorhome and they were living in a tent. It was before I was born, but she gave birth in a campground to my older brother. And it was just, I say in the book, being poor and being on welfare, we were both on government welfare and also Mormon church welfare. They have a very comprehensive welfare system, which is very generous, and we availed ourselves of it. I don't have a problem with any of those. I mean, I think, the aim is to get people out of it and to change their mindset and to help them rise above their circumstances. But there's no shame in being poor. God says, blessed are the poor in heart. And but from my perspective, the problem was that it was also very abusive. It was physically, emotionally, and in my case, sexually abusive and just spiritually abusive overall. And so there was a lot of mental health problems that came out of the situation. And so I think the timing of the book, and I know we were talking a little bit earlier, Jacob, about timing of books and when things come out, just seeing the timing in the country where so much of our country is being attacked mentally and seeing a decline in mental health, like it's a big problem. And so my hope in writing the book is to share some of my strategies and how I overcame the mental health problems. And most importantly, how I returned to God after being in this very abusive spiritual, I describe it as a cult environment. And I'm very particular to make sure I draw this distinction between what my dad did and the official LDS or Mormon church, because he was actually excommunicated from the Mormon church for being such an extremist.
And one of the things I've noticed is with the LDS, with these offshoots, they tend to hyper focus on certain things. So, like, for instance, there was a LDS offshoot in Texas that was really big for a while, and they were accused of harming the children in the most horrible ways imaginable. But their focus particularly was on, and there's no easy way to say this, but their main focus on was breeding. That was something they were telling all their girls: you all need to get married, you need to have many kids, and nothing wrong with large families, obviously, but the purpose behind it seemed a little suspect. And I'm curious, the particular offshoot that you were a part of, did they have, something that they really pressed in to, for their members that they wanted you to hone in on?
Well, it was very much a homespun cult, really of my dad's own creation. And I try to be as compassionate to understanding my dad's, the roots of his radicalization, and try to paint, I think, as accurate as pictures as possible. So he believes that he's a prophet sent by God to save America from destruction, and that he would become president someday. And part of why I described kind of the three main ingredients as I saw it. One was that he had severe childhood trauma. He was sexually abused by a Mormon babysitter from his congregation, a woman who the family trusted. And unfortunately, he was born in 1938. And this was a time and place when sexual abuse, for children just wasn't really treated or discussed or understood. And instead of getting this woman arrested, instead of bringing her to the authorities, both legal and spiritual, getting her removed or stripped or put on probation for the Mormon church, and then getting her, arrested and penalized for childhood sexual assault, his parents, and getting him into therapy and getting him mental health treatment, his parents did none of that. And unfortunately, she got away scot-free. And what they did was they bought him a toy shovel, like a toy bulldozer, basically, to kind of make him feel better temporarily. But obviously that was not enough. And he said later on in life that that incident made him feel suicidal, which is quite common for survivors of childhood sexual assault. The suicide rate is multiple times higher that of the general population. So in the Bible, when Jesus says that if you cause a little one to stumble, it would be better that if you had a millstone wrapped around your neck and you're thrown into the sea, because childhood abuse it's deeply affecting. And I know that it definitely affected my father, and he's 85 years old now, and he has Alzheimer's. And he still talks about what happened, and it still hurts him. He's never gotten treated for it. I've tried to urge him to get into therapy, but he says he doesn't need it, and yet he still talks about the trauma as if it's very fresh. But anyway, so that's one of the main factors. And then he also had extraordinary musical gifts, which I think is part of what contributed to his narcissism and his just belief in his exceptionalism, because he was truly at his peak an exceptional world-class musician. So he, if any of your viewers know about Andre Segovia, if you follow classical music at all. So Andre Segovia was perhaps the world's greatest classical guitarist. He was knighted by the King of Spain. He had 10 honorary doctorates. He won a Lifetime Grammy Achievement Award. There's literally an asteroid named after him. So he is a rock star, but a classical guitarist. And he hand-selected my father to be one of his proteges. And through my father's both performance and then also my father's own music compositions, Andre Segovia just helped him blossom his talent and bring him to this world-class level, to the point where my father, he won a nationwide search for the best young music composer. He won it.
Oh, wow.
The story, my father tells the story of this is back in, I don't know, maybe the 60s. And he said they opened the envelope and they're like, where the hell is Provo, Utah? Mm-hmm. And so he helped put Utah on the map. And then he also got a master's degree in music composition, and he became a professor of classical guitar at Brigham Young University. So lots of credentialing, very impressive guy. So that is, so childhood sexual assault, extreme level of talent, which contributed to the narcissism. And then what I believe is sort of combined with the radicalization that he experienced as a Mormon missionary. Again, this was not sanctioned by the LDS Church. I'm very clear to separate that from what he did and how he interpreted the extremism, because LDS theology teaches that human males can become sovereign over their own planet someday and spend all eternity copulating with their wives to create spirit children to populate the planet. And that's what they believe planet Earth is, that the planet, the God of planet Earth lives on a planet called Kolob, and that's how he spends eternity. And we are the spirit children of that God. So it's, and that Jesus is our older brother, not that he is God incarnate, that it's not a Trinitarian religion. So I think the way my father interpreted this level of calling and this level of, if you're going to, and they also teach that the learning and the knowledge and the power that you are able to accumulate on earth you take that skill set with you into the afterlife. That's why the LDS culture is so big on education, which is something I admire. But I think in my dad's case, he took it to the extreme. And so combine those ingredients to the point where, boom, he got in some sort of argument with the Brigham Young University team because he was traveling around Spain without sanction and sleeping in Mormon churches and playing music and preaching. And finally, they're like, this is enough. Like, you're fired, basically. And
Wow.
From that, he decided, well, you know what? I'm going to give up a secular music career and I am going to be a homespun Mormon prophet. And so he would play his classical guitar on street corners and pass out brochures, thousands and thousands of brochures that had his writing along with Book of Mormon quotes and Mormon prophets, and then also some King James version of the Bible quotes and some, Mother Teresa and some really admirable people like Martin Luther King Jr. So that was the focus of our cult. It was a musical cult, which is like kind of really strange to describe it to people. But so I grew up in the motorhome, and eventually we all went with him. All 10 of us would play together on street corners, passing out these brochures and trying to convert people to be Mormon. And again, all of this would be fine if it wasn't combined with this intense brainwashing that we are evil, that we are not worthy, and eventually 2 of my brothers unfortunately developed schizophrenia. And my father said that they deserved it because they were evil and they didn't honor him enough. And one of those brothers tried to sexually assault me, and he groped me when I was 17. And the other schizophrenic brother said I tried to seduce him to have sex with me. And my dad said, you dress like a slut, and you basically urged him on. And it was just like so many lies that were spoken over all of us for so long. And I eventually said, I've had enough. I don't believe you're a prophet. It was a long discernment period, which I talk about in the book, of how I discerned that I don't believe you're a prophet, because it's your father. You want to honor and believe him. And I actually talk about honoring your parents, and something that Billy Graham said about that, which is that you need to honor your parents, treat them in an honorable way, even if they don't live in an honorable manner. And that's something that, as children, we have responsibility to do, even if they aren't living in an honorable manner, that we should still bring honor to them in terms of treating them honorably, and not allowing anger and rage, which in my case, I had a lot of rage against my father for a long time. So anyway, I told him, I don't believe you're a prophet. I want to go away for college. And he raised his hand to the square and he said, I prophesy in the name of Jesus, you'll be raped and murdered if you leave. Mm. And so at that point, my brother tried to rape me. He said, I'm getting raped. It's like, okay, like, I need to make a choice. And so I did choose freedom, and I left. I got disowned. My dad said my blood changed. I was no longer his daughter, and put myself through college, working as a janitor, and then working as this, at the student newspaper and fast food jobs. And meanwhile, overcoming or struggling, it took a long time to overcome PTSD, anxiety, depression, and then eventually later on fibromyalgia. And
I've noticed that with those kind of controlling behaviors. So, calling your own children evil, and then telling you all this horrible stuff was going to happen to you if you walked out the door and went your own way. And one of the things that I've heard other survivors say is, even after you disconnect from that every once in a while, just because of the the PTSD, every once in a while you'll still have like a moment where you think, oh, is this because of this? And you just kind of have to shake it off. I'm curious, in your own life, have you experienced that, where every once in a while, those old feelings of fear will pop up? And if so, how do you overcome them?
Yeah, it's interesting. So just as an example, I was just down in Peru in June doing some volunteer work and with my church, and we were going around and helping pass out food and other things, and just helping the family and giving financial support and singing with them and praying with them at churches and at schools. And we went to the word church is too strong. We went to this area that is used as a church facility, but it only had, I think, 2 walls and a tarp over it, cement walls. And that's where the church was, and that's where they would meet. And they didn't have the money to finish it. And next door, or right down the block, so they didn't have a bathroom. And so some of us, we had to hike all the way up. It's basically like the equivalent neighborhood of a favela up in Brazil, but this was in Peru, just to give people an idea. So we had to almost climb vertical at some points to get to this place. So some of us had to go to the bathroom. And so they brought us to a home right nearby the church. And I was transformed, and I was just like, oh my gosh, it's like a time machine. It was like a time vortex. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it was like I was living in the shed in the Ozarks, and I'm 17 when I took my ACT test. We were living in a shed with no running water and having 10 people in there. And the way the toilet facility was set up reminded me of their toilet facility, and the smell of like the blue chlorine that you put in is what we had to put in the motorhome. So it's just like every now and then I'll have like a memory like that, like the smell of the blue chlorine packets that you put in, and the sanitation. It's just like, wow, I'm in a time machine and I'm 17 in the Ozarks again, even though I'm actually in Peru and I'm 40, so it's, yeah. So things like that come up. I think the important thing is that, not allowing it to control you, and not allowing it to, I was just reading a passage in the Bible about godly sorrow versus worldly sorrow. And godly sorrow is the kind that is allowing you to have no regrets, is what the verse says. And worldly sorrow is the kind that leads to death. And I would describe that as worldly sorrow as like rumination, and allowing that to have you spiral down. And trust me, I've had lots of spiraling moments, but I think overall now I have better equipped. I am better equipped to manage those triggering, in part because I'm aware of it. And then I'm also aware that I had it described to me as it's like a wave, where it's like if you're riding a wave, like if you're surfing, the wave of grief will just kind of crash over you. But just knowing there is an end to that, knowing that even if you're in it, it's actually just a point in time, and the wave will crash, and then you will feel better. So just knowing that's happening, and not forcing yourself to, just, I think sometimes in Christianity, there's this bumper sticker grace, and just put on a smile and you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
You're not praying enough, just pray and you'll be fine, and you won't have these feelings. But it's like the feelings are actually normal, and they're part of the human experience. And there's a psychiatrist who I recommend if anyone's interested in this topic, named Kurt Thompson, and I mention him in my book. But he's a neuroscientist and an MD, and he's Christian, and he just weaves the science of emotion and Christianity and faith in the brain just seamlessly. And to know that suppressing your emotions is not godly. And in fact, God gives us emotions are a gift from God. Knowing that Jesus wept over the death of Lazarus. He didn't have to do that. He could have, as Mary and Martha said, like, if you came here before, he wouldn't have died. And so why did he allow 3 days to pass before he shows up, and he's clearly dead? And then he wept. None of that had to happen. He didn't have to sit there with the grief. That's the quick bumper sticker way, would be to just do away with that. So I think, hopefully that helps.
I think so. And it's amazing to see, because we were talking off air about how you go from this very sort of tragic background, and now you've really accomplished so much in your life. You started a media company. You are a sought after public speaker. You are a policy analyst. You do all these kinds of things. You're a political commentator. And, it's been probably surreal in some moments where you're like, how did I get here? And it's amazing to see that redemption story go from, you grew up in a place. I believe I heard you one time that after your experience with your family sort of offshoot, that you became agnostic for a while, and you had to really come back to the truth and the love of God. And, just to hear you talk now, that's such an amazing testimony. I like you were saying, the bumper sticker, one that I used to hear a lot was, you can't have a testimony without a test. And it's like, and I'm like, well, that's not really comforting to me, when I, lose a relative to suicide, or when my grandparent dies very tragically. And that sort of bumper sticker mentality isn't really a comfort to me, but knowing that it's okay to be sorrowful, that it's okay to have moments when you're sad, and those aren't points, those aren't necessarily weak points. That you feel weak in the moment, obviously, but they're not a weak point in your faith. And I just think that your story going from here to where you are now is really amazing, and seeing everything that you're doing. And I'm curious, what prompted you to put this to pen? Because I write fiction. I don't write. I've written 3 novels. I've written a short story. I'm not. I don't write. Biopics or memoirs or anything like that. One of my favorite writers, Jerry B. Jenkins, he does that a lot. That's how he got his start, was writing biographies. And I'm kind of going the opposite way. I'm starting with fiction, and maybe I'll work my way to a nonfiction book. But I'm curious, what made you decide to sit down and go, hey, I'm going to tell my story, tragedy and all, what direction it's going to go, whatever direction that it manages. I'm curious, what made you decide that, hey, I'm going to share this part of my life? It's something, obviously, for a while, I imagine, was very private and whatnot, but you're going to throw it out there so other people can be inspired by it. What prompted you to do that?
Yeah, well, and you are the opposite of Amy Chua, the tiger mom, because she just came out with a book of fiction in September. She's written multiple nonfiction, and her first one was a bio, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom. Was her life story with a tiger mom, and now she's a tiger mom. So you're the opposite, but and she's given me an endorsement. I'm very grateful. She's given me an endorsement for the book.
Fantastic.
Which is, to me, I'm like, okay, this is good harbinger, because she helped J.D. Vance write his book. He had been a law school student of hers at Yale Law, and she had really encouraged him. And then she also endorsed Tara Westover's book, Educated, which is another book that my book has been compared to. And she blessed that. So I'm like, okay, the fairy godmother of tragic American biopics has blessed my book as well. So hopefully it can touch some lives. But my purpose in writing it, and what's really interesting, Jacob, is I actually had about 20,000 words written way back in 2015.
Oh, wow.
Before I started Bold TV. As you mentioned, I ran this TV network, and the agent I had at the time, we both were discussing, because I had I was writing a book before I had the idea for Bold TV, and we both were kind of like, well, what should we do first? Should we get the book contract or launch the media company? And we both agreed, hey, let's launch the media company and then come out with a book. Well, let me tell you, that working title of the book back then was The Heathen Next Door: How I Left Religion and Found Joy. So it was basically going to be a book bashing organized religion and saying how great and grateful I was, and I was happy to see the secularization of America. So it was going to be basically like a Saul book, and now I'm writing a book.
Wow, that's a great analogy.
Yeah. So in that period from launching Bold TV, a lot happened, and I get into the book about my conversion, but partially I met people who were instrumental to my conversion through Bold TV. And so I do believe now, in hindsight, like, God stopped me from writing that book. So I didn't have to first of all, to make sure I met the right people who helped me on my walk. I don't even know if I would be a Christian if I had written that first book. I don't know. And at the very least, to not have to backtrack and write, major revisions to a new first edition. So, but my intention now in writing it, and back then too, my goal was to help people who do feel trapped and who have been abused and who have dealt with trauma, to help equip them with tools and resources, and also understanding for themselves, and then also for people who maybe haven't gone through trauma, but to help them have greater empathy and understanding for people who have dealt with religious trauma, sexual trauma, emotional, physical trauma. Like, there are lots of different types of trauma. And it was interesting, when I was first diagnosed with trauma in college, I remember actually feeling guilty about it because I was like, well, PTSD is just for like people who go to military. I didn't serve in the military. Like I'm not worthy of that diagnosis, which is
Right.
pretty messed up. And that's, but that feeling of unworthiness was always pervasive in our childhood. You're not worthy. You're not deserving. And so I carried that with me for a long time. So my intention for writing the book is to tell people you are worthy, but also to know that at the end of the day, it's actually not about you. It really is about God and God's healing in you. And so I say in the introduction that God is the hero of the book. I am not the hero. At best, I'm an anti-hero because I made some very stupid mistakes, which I talk about. And I, have tried to process and, accept my bad choices and not blame my parents for it. But also to break generational curses, because trauma does get passed on from generation to generation unless we stop it. So knowing that this woman sexually abused my father and passed that on to him, and then he abused us in his own ways, I didn't want that manifest in my future life. I wanted to stop that. And so it's the audience is really both for, non-believers to help them see the power of faith. Also, I talk about a lot of the science behind faith and religious community and how it's actually very good for your mental health. Harvard School of Public Health recently did a study that found 68% women who went to church service once a week were 68% less likely to die of suicide, drug overdose, or alcoholism. It's called, death of despair. And men were 33% less likely. So just scientifically seeing the power of this. And then the National Bureau of Economic Research found a similar impact of religious participation on your mental health and suicide prevention. So even if you're not, if you're skeptic, and as a recovered agnostic, like you said, I was agnostic for about 12 years. I call that period my walk of darkness. And so I do believe that mental health is spiritual health. And so my book is for both believers, non-believers, and also specifically for Christians to know, how can I support people who are going through doubt and a walk of darkness? Because I think so often, especially among conservatives, we can be judgmental and maybe even mock people for having beliefs that are not healthy or true, when we should really be having compassion for them, because that's ultimately how Jesus was. And yes, it's true that Jesus was very outspoken against the religious authorities of the day, but I think it's important to distinguish between that versus everyday people who were suffering, whether, suffering a spiritual element or a physical element, everyday lay people, if you will. He showed nothing but compassion for them.
That's absolutely correct. And I find that that is so true, because I remember when I was growing up, and especially when I was a teenager, there was this real big new atheist movement. You probably are familiar with it, right? All these books were coming out, the Blind Clockmaker, all these types of books. And one of the things that they would often say is, hey, you're just using your faith, your religion as a crutch. And I remember thinking, why is that a bad thing? If you're using your philosophy as an atheist, philosophy isn't science, obviously, you're using that as a crutch. So what's wrong with if I need an extra help up some mornings because I'm sad? I remember even thinking this as a teenager. This is well before my theological training, but I remember thinking that I would be like, well, what's wrong with that? Every once in a while we need a help up, we need a handout. And that's one thing why I love Jesus so much, why I'm a Christian, is his arms are ever open. And I think that is something that we can all learn from. And, you and I were going to talk about other topics, but discussing this, it was way more interesting, I think. And I'm one last question for you. What is something you want a reader to take away from a book whether they listen to the audiobook or read it digitally or read the physical copy, which I plan to do? What are you hoping that the reader walks away when they complete your book? What do you hope that they find from it?
Yeah, I think two big themes: God is not politics, and God is not religion. So for God is not politics, as an agnostic, I definitely tried different things to fill the void of that God-shaped hole in your heart, as they say. I tried my work. I tried dating, relationships. I tried, I got a full scholarship for a tuition journalism scholarship to Harvard for my master's degree. So I tried human intellect and studying. And all these things just weren't cutting it. And then I thought I had finally realized something that wouldn't fail me, and that was politics. Well, guess what? Politics failed me too. And so there's a book I recommend also by Tim Keller called Counterfeit Gods, which
Oh,
basically
I've read that. Fantastic book.
amazing book. Each chapter is a false god that people try to use to fill the void of God, and you'll never be satisfied. And so to know that God is not politics, and seeing that a lot of people, I think both on the left and the right, put politics ahead of God, and that's dangerous. It's unhealthy. I know this from experience. The other big theme, like I said, is that God is not religion, and that's something that I didn't understand when I was younger, because I saw people abusing me in the name of God and using religion as a crutch. So I think religion is basically the human broken expression of trying to draw to God, and in its best form, religion does draw you closer to God, but in its broken form, it in many ways can drive people away from God. So understanding that God is not religion, I think, is, or as people say, religion is not relationship. That is a very important distinction, and that's, I think, a big part of why young people walk away, why I walked away, because not only did I see it in the Mormon church, I saw it, with the Catholic abuse scandal, and I was attending a non-denominational church after leaving BYU, and I had a terrible experience, saw spiritual abuse, saw religious abuse again, and that's part of why I walked away. And to know that that is not God. And I think that's the most important thing to impart from the book, ideally, is that if you unplug away from God, you're actually unplugging from the life-giving source that's going to transform your life and provide healing in your life. And knowing that God is not religion. And if you've been hurt by religious hurt or church hurt, as they sometimes say, that's not from God. And to know that's not, just understand the difference and find a community where they are plugged in and they will bring you in closer relationship to God, then your life's really going to improve.
Absolutely. And one final thing. I know I said last question, but I did think another one while you were talking. So, Hillbilly Elegy became a film. I put it on what the year it came out. I put it on my top 10 favorite films. It starred Glenn Close, Amy Adams, directed by Ron Howard. And I'm curious if your book ever becomes a movie, who would you like to play you in the role, especially as it gets into your as you get into your adult years? Who would you like to see portray you on screen?
As they say in politics, I'm not going to comment on hypotheticals. I don't know. I'll leave that. If I don't know if it'll happen, we'll see. But I have some people do compare me to my features to Alexis Bledel. So I don't know how she feels about faith or walking with God, but I'll leave that up to them. I just was at an event a couple weeks ago with the guy who founded the Jesus movie, what is it? The Jesus Revolution.
Oh, right. With Kelsey Grammer.
Yeah, I made me want to see it because he was getting an award at the Museum of the Bible. So I haven't seen that movie yet, but they asked him about the movie and how involved was he? And apparently he was on set every day, in part to help them know what it was like to be a pastor, because they have a lot of pastor scenes in there apparently, and they didn't know anything about it. Like, as far as I'm a film producer, I'm not a pastor, so just how do you lay hands on someone? How do you just things like that, but yeah, so I guess that would be the one thing, is I do want to be heavily involved if it does happen, because I don't want them to mess it up. But we'll see.
Well, I really hope that your book is a bestseller. Like I said, it sounds amazing. I can't wait to read it. The book is The Motorhome Prophecies: A Journey of Healing and Forgiveness. It of course is written by Carrie here. And Carrie, where can people find you if they want to find out more information about the book, or just follow you on social media?
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. And again, I appreciate the opportunity and thanks for the chat. Yeah, so I've got a website, just my name, carriesheffield.com. I'm on the social platforms. I'm on Twitter, Getter. I'll be starting a podcast on some faith issues on Getter live stream. So stay tuned to that. And then I am, as you mentioned, working in policy for the Independent Women's Forum, and was really grateful earlier this year to be able to testify before a House subcommittee on economic issues and to be sitting at the table next to Casey Mulligan, who is a rock star economist at the University of Chicago and was, former one of the former chief economic advisors in the White House. To be at the table with him, I was like, this is an honor. This is the girl from the motorhome is at the table with the big boys. So my work at Independent Women's Forum is, you can find us at iwf.org.
And if you're interested, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe here on Studio Jake. All my socials are in the About page. I really appreciate you tuning in. Be sure to check out my locals page. That's how you can support me as an independent creator. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, who watched this. If you have a question, leave me a comment. I'll be happy to answer as best I can. And I'll see you next time right here on Studio Jake. Have a happy Thanksgiving. And Carrie, once again, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jake. God bless and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you'll give it a thumbs up, that you'll leave me a comment, tell me what you think, that you'll share it out with your friends, and of course, consider subscribing to Studio Jake. I cover all kinds of nerd and pop culture topics, including film, television, anime, comic books, and so much more. I hope that you'll also head over to my main website, StudioJakeMedia.com, where I have even more news, views, and commentary. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, head over to my locals page. That's studiojakemedia.locals.com. It's the best way to support me. I'm trying to build a little community there. I have exclusive reviews and articles, so definitely head over there and check it out. And I'll see you next time right here on Studio Jake.